Hi guys, John Florez again, my studious look. This is so much fun, I can't stand it. I just read one of the best books I've ever read on the record business, in particular, production. And previous to this, I have recommended to you David Foster's book and Tom Dowd's book, both engineer producers. Well, I don't know what happened here that I didn't know this man. It's absolutely incredible. Bill Schnee, Schnee. His new book is called Chairman of the Board, and that means the mixing board. And boy, was he ever and is he ever. This book shows his creative process, not just the way his mind works, but the way it worked in collaboration with all kinds of different artists. He goes into specifics with each of them. He stays away from a lot of controversy. I noticed that he stayed away from mentioning drugs with any of his producer clients or executive clients, though he did mention them occasionally with artists, which was extremely true for the times that we lived in. The other area that Bill didn't mention at all was payola, and maybe he wasn't exposed to it. I know that when I talked to Lenny Waronker at Warner Brothers after he became president, I went into a 5-minute pitch about payola, and Lenny basically said, I don't know what you're talking about. And I really firmly believe he meant it. Now, we all know historically what payola meant back in the Dick Clark and Alan Freed days and things like that. A big book, wonderfully written book that I highly recommend is called Hitmen, and it really chronicles a lot of payola and a group called The Network. And the Network was, I believe, 5 promotion men who got extraordinarily rich by paying for airplay for years and never went to jail. Some of them I knew, not personally, but certainly over the phone. So anyway, Bill Schnee stayed away from that in his book. Whether any of his acts were involved with it or those record labels, I don't know. But he seemed to be astounded that a couple of projects he produced didn't get promoted. And I thought, well, yeah. It's not due to the quality of the music he was making. It was due to the fact that that promotion machine wasn't behind him on those projects. I wouldn't call it naivete. I would just say that this is an artist. Bill is an artist who is immersed in his craft. Okay, I highly recommend Chairman of the Board. It's just an excellent read. Okay, what it did with me, and that I want to share with you, is that it triggered in me a series of memories that I don't know that I have shared with you properly in the past, and I think you'll find it entertaining. At least I hope you do. Okay, when I came on board at RCA at age 22, and I was the youngest staff producer in the nation, I remember artists coming in who were, what would you call them, more rock artists than what RCA did at the time. And they would say, John, why isn't your label signing more artists like us? And I said, well, that's because that isn't what we do here. That isn't our style. If you want that, go to Warner Brothers or go to Clive Davis at Columbia in New York. That's where the emphasis is now for those guys. But right now, Capitol, Columbia, and RCA, and I mean Columbia West Coast, primarily, a couple exceptions, but for the most part, we were all doing what I would call old school pop music. We were right on the borderline of a culture change, and we hadn't quite adapted to it yet, those 3 labels. So, for instance, it was John Florez and Rick Girard at RCA, my friend Al DeLore at Capitol, who produced Glenn Campbell by the time I get to Phoenix, Wichita Lineman, all that stuff. Jerry Fuller at Columbia, and he was, God didn't make those little green apples, Gary Puckett in the Union Gap. We were all kind of coming out of the early to mid-60s where a transition was in effect then from the singers like Frank Sinatra and Jack Jones and Steve Lawrence, Eddie Gourmet, those type of artists. And the transition was to the Beach Boys, the Mamas and the Papas, the Fifth Dimension, and things that were, a little hipper than the standalone Las Vegas singers. Okay, so this is where the big three labels in LA, that's where our heads were at the time. And that's what I was trained to do. I didn't artistically choose RCA and that style. RCA chose me, and I fit into their style. So when Joe Reisman said, pick the kind of group or pick the kind of act that you want to work with, I said, well, someone like the Fifth Dimension. And eventually I did get to produce them. But in the short term, it was a whole slew of pop R&B acts, starting with the Friends of Distinction that I discovered at the Daisy, a little club in Beverly Hills, back in 1968. And that led to Willie Hutch and Five Flights Up and Sisters Love, Carl Graves, LAX, Fifth Dimension, and of course one of my favorites, Ronnie Dyson, who, by the way, I produced for free for Columbia Records in exchange for being allowed to do the next Johnny Mathis album that would be recorded a few months later. So I think you need to understand, just like, say, with American newsrooms, they're their own culture. They live in their own world. We lived at Columbia, Capitol, and RCA in our own world, and that was our world. Okay, the Jimmy Hiltons at Warner Brothers producing Iron Butterfly and Agata Davida, that was not us. So in our own little closed universe, we did what we did. Now, the epiphany that came from reading Bill's book was, first, not only didn't I know him, which is odd in that we were born in the same town a year apart, that's Phoenix, and we worked in the music business in LA, right down the street from each other, at different studios, but we never bumped into each other, which is most odd. And I didn't know who he was. He was producing multi-styles of music, starting as an engineer and then going into engineer production and then production. But the epiphany came from the fact that his universe was totally different than mine. I had the musical universe in LA. I had it into two distinct areas, what we were doing and what Warner and Clive at Columbia, New York was doing. So it was either sweet pop or it was rock and roll. Well, Bill Schnee, I would say, made most of his living, or a good portion of his living, doing acts that were right in the middle of that. That never even occurred to me. I was so living in my own universe. So Bill was doing acts like Pablo Cruz and Steely Dan and several acts like that. He did some harder rock things. He did some jazz. He did everything, frankly. But the interestingness is that, yes, we use some of the same musicians, but for the most part, he was even more eclectic than I was, or more opinionated than I was, on what musicians he wanted to use. I had 2 or 3 stock kind of groups of people that I brought in for various styles, and that was it. And he would switch people in and out, and yes, he had his go-to people, but he was a lot more varied than I was. I was pretty rigid, okay? So Bill ended up in a universe that was so totally separate from mine, and what's so interesting that maybe he doesn't realize, and maybe he does, is that the group of artists and management and label executives that he dealt with were all at a much higher level than mine in terms of being musical insiders. So there was a power structure, and that power structure was above the one that I circulated in. So his artists already had big budgets, big label commitments. Much of them had pay-for-play budgets behind them, and I won't go any further into that than to say that. So Bill was able to circulate between all these wonderful artists, the Boz Scaggs, Toto, on and on and on, just amazing stuff. And then these records would be promoted. Well, duh. I, on the other hand, I wasn't at that level, didn't have that level, and I worked, unfortunately, because of my reputation starting with the Friends of Distinction as the white boy who made mocha mix music. I developed a style because of the first group I signed, the Friends of Distinction. So I had this kind of, I don't know, it was, I would say, a step hipper than most of the Fifth Dimensions stuff. And it was, I would call syrupy pop R&B. It was pretty darn sweet, you know, and radio, black radio particularly, didn't know what to do with it. Rock radio didn't know what to do with it. And middle of the road radio or adult contemporary loved it. But you have record labels that I work for scratching their heads saying, what have you made us? What have you done? And so the next influence was, as opposed to Bill just taking artist after artist after artist, that sort of in his social circuit came to him, and it all just kind of evolved so naturally, artist after artist after artist. I decided to model myself after Tom Bell. Now, not in terms of sound. Tom Bell was a much blacker sound than mine, with the stylistics and the spinners and all of his acts. But what Tom had was a formula. Songwriting was in-house. He arranged, produced, conducted. That was in-house. Linda Creed was the signature background singer on the back of his productions. It's the same studio, the same musicians, the same everything. And I thought, well, this is the way to go. And I'll do that with my kind of syrupy sound. And what I'll do is, instead of Linda Creed, who Tom has, so I can't have her, I'll use Linda Seals. And Linda Seals will become the signature sound for everything that I work on that is in-house. We're not talking Fifth Dimension, Johnny Mathis, Helen Reddy, whatever. I'm saying the acts that I developed, that I was involved with at that point, would all have Linda's signature sound on it. So for instance, when we had a hit with Carl Graves over at A&M on Baby Hang Up the Phone, basically Linda Seals / LAX, the vocal group she was a part of, they take over half the song, including the intro. And Carl said, what are you doing? I don't really enter the tune until, well, 30 seconds in or so. What's up with the group introducing me? That's what Darnell and I call the hero moments. That's where you come in and you take it up a notch from the group that just introduced you.
Oh, I wonder how many times I've dialed this number. Baby, hang up the phone. Baby, hang up the phone. You don't want to hear me cry. Baby, hang up the phone. Baby, hang up the phone. You don't want to hear me say goodbye.
Okay, so I thought at the time, oh boy, look, I own production at a good royalty rate. I own the publishing. And all these things had to do was get promoted, and Carol, my wife, and I were going to make a ton of money, and the artist would be very successful. But we had our formula, and it was a family set formula, just like Tom Bell had, but in my own syrupy pop R&B style. Okay, that moment maybe changed my life forever, because that possibly is where a whole bunch of stuff started falling apart. Here's why. I need to backtrack to tell you this first. When I was at Talent Associates Records, after leaving RCA, James Bingham and Five Flights Up and I had a big hit with Do What You Want to Do. And that record was promoted. And I won't go into how it was promoted, but it was promoted. Okay, so now we're on the charts, and it's our first record out. I'm asked to do an album. We do the entire album, and it is just beautiful. I love that album. At the time, Talent Associates was distributed by Bell Records, and major career and money-losing event for me happened right after Do What You Want to Do. The key executive at my label left, and all of a sudden, we had Steve Bender, who was president of the label, but he was a TV guy, and his contacts were all TV. And we had Bell Records, which was the distributing label, and they were, other than the Fifth Dimension, pretty much a cutesy, catchy, teeny, David Cassidy and the Partridge Family kind of label. Okay, did not suit what we were doing, plus They had no payola budget. In fact, when I went to work for Bell Records a couple years later, I was told out front that I couldn't do my black acts anymore because they had no payola budget. Okay, so the prime executive leaves Talent Associates after Do What You Want to Do with Five Flights Up, and now nothing that we do on Five Flights Up is promoted. Okay, so you need to know that entire lovely album is in the can. It's in the vault. It never got released. And some of those tracks I no longer have to share with you, and I'm sorry, I lost them a few years ago with a hard drive crash. Shame on me. But the rest of them I have posted. The unreleased that I do have, I have posted. Okay, so that album was never released. There was no promotion, there was no anything. Then I went in and I cut Linda Seals for Talent Associates. I would call her the black Karen Carpenter. Low, mellow, black. You might not know that she's black, but she is, and she sings just great. And I went in and I cut initially for Talent Associates, distributed by Bell Records, no payola budget. I cut 3 6/8 ballads that are still amongst my best work to date. I remember Eddie Rosenblatt's wife, Bobby, saying, "It'll Never Happen Again" is one of the best records you've ever produced, John. Well, when Bell Records heard it, they said, "What the hell are you doing with 3 6/8 ballads, John? We can't sell this. Go in and try to make something commercial, for God's sakes." So I spent the next 3 months trying to do that, and eventually we recut Angel of the Morning, which I like, and it had the Blossoms on it, famous background singers for Phil Spector and other producers, and it was a fine commercial record. But in retrospect, it wasn't the most unusual, true to my artist cuts that those first 6/8 ballads were. We should have had an entire album of lovely ballads like that in the jazz vein. Clarence McDonald, the Friends of Distinction's arranger, he arranged and conducted these tracks, and he had his very soulful group, Sound 70, sing the background vocals. And frankly, they're just lovely. They don't fit the high power, oh boy, is this a smash hit, stand up and shout record. They were just beautifully understated, and they were true to the heart of the singer that is Linda Seals. I spent the next 11 years with Linda trying to fit her into some sort of commercial category like Bell Records told me to do in the first place after they rejected our ballads. I'm sorry, Linda. I'm sorry. You're an absolutely brilliant pop jazz singer, and I love you. I'm sorry, but actually that advice from Bell Records ended up sinking into my mindset. So instead of going in and making as many quote unquote special records as I had been making in the past, now I was looking to try to produce more commercially to please the labels, instead of basically sticking with the authenticity of my artists. Now that isn't true in every case, so we won't go into that. But that's where it began, and then of course when Rock the Boat, which I hated, went #1, then I went even more commercial after that. And what a shame. It just bent my mindset. Producers like Bill Schnee never did that. They just went with the integrity of the artist and never budged. And I so respect that, and that's the way I was when I started. That is not the producer I turned out to be. So kind of wrapping this up, let's go back. 5 Flights Up, entire album, scrapped, put on the shelf, sitting in the vault, gathering dust. Entire Linda Seals album, same thing, sitting in the vault, gathering dust.
I remember the first affair. All the pain
go to A&M Records, have a hit on Baby Hang Up the Phone with Carl Graves, and cut an entire album on Carl, get a beautiful bouquet and foodstuff basket in Hawaii from Herb Alpert and Jerry Moss saying, beautiful album. Well, yeah, but the album got shelved and was never released. That's 3 albums in a row that I produced that never got released. Oops.
Take a better look before we start to smother. Better take a look at one another. Don't you know I can feel a change, a stillness in the air.
Now, what will still baffle me to this day is that Carl was asked to go in and record another album, and he had no hits that I know of off of that to compare with Baby Hang Up the Phone, but still the label released that, and yet they were so thrilled about mine, and they didn't release it. So, if you figure now I have this family format with Linda Seals, the same players, the same writers, the same everything, and here we are prepared to make a little money and have some fun with Carl Graves, and the whole thing just is shelved. I to this day do not understand that. But I will say that without naming a name, a very powerful promotional force at A&M basically came to me and said, John, we really don't have the ability to financially and morally compete in the pop R&B marketplace like we would like to. Okay, that explains why Carl's product didn't go forward with me, but how come A&M went ahead and released a less successful product than mine when they didn't have the means to support it? To this day, that's a heartbreaker. And remember, this is my little family. This is my John Florez's Tom Bell ripoff concept of everybody sounding the same with Linda Seals backing it all up. So then to move this forward as fast as I can, Kip Cohen, my boss at A&M, who's very happy with the Carl Graves cut, signs my group LAX that had previously just had a single release on Warner Brothers. He buys the Warner Brothers tracks. We go in, we do the same family concept, we have the same writers, we have the same everything. We cut an album. Now, the album in many respects is, I guess, the weakest album I've ever cut, but there might be 2 or 3 singles on it. So the LAX album is done. We have a promise from Kip Cohen that there will be a coming out party in LA on stage with LAX before the music industry, introducing the act to the industry and to the public. That never happened. To this day, I don't know what happened with that. We released a cute, catchy little single called I Betcha, which is a kind of a commercial, I don't know. I wouldn't call it a train wreck. It's cute. But it's certainly, I don't know, it's LAX's version of Rock the Boat. It certainly wasn't the best thing we had, but it was feed the marketplace stuff like I'm so ashamed that I did now that I look back. Okay, Bill Schnee never would have done that. Neither would have Tom Dowd or David Foster. They wouldn't have accepted that. But I did. Now that actually on its own got some airplay in the Pacific Northwest and almost broke out, but it didn't. And when it didn't, LAX was dropped from A&M. Dropped from A&M. And that entire album, let alone the coming out party we never had, that entire album sits on the shelf unreleased.
She's got me singing shala do I humming shala no I'm still she don't know me. She's got me planning shala
I'm speechless. All I can say is that looking back, this was the beginning of the end, and it was already 1975.
Right there when you need a shoulder to lean on. Time is my money, money is my time. Give me some of yours, and I'll give you some of mine. I want somebody who can take and give to instead of me giving all and getting nothing from you. For my time, oh my time is money, honey. My time, oh my time and money, honey. Hey, my time, oh my time, money, honey. Hey, oh my time.
So I'd been in the business 7 years, and I should have seen it coming. Yes, I foolishly came back for more after taking a year off in Phoenix. I came back and did Helen Reddy and Frida Payne, and actually had more creative fun doing the new artists and new writers that I did that you've never heard of on the side from those two artists that you have heard of, Helen Reddy and Frida Payne. Had more fun with Mark Creamer and his people, and all of the artists that came through there that we demoed. Just had a blast and learned a lot. So thank you, you guys. But to summarize, I lived in a different universe. Ideally, as a staff producer, I probably belonged starting in 1960, maybe 59, because I was a big Platters fan in the late 50s and doo-wop fan and all of that. I probably would have been a better traditional staff producer those years all the way through, say 1970. And then as music was thoroughly shifting into something hipper and harder, though there were still lots of exceptions, look at the Carpenters, you could still produce sweet stuff. But for the most part, culture had changed, taste had changed. Album sales were the thing now, not singles. All my royalties come from singles, not albums. I was really a dinosaur, and I was still in my 20s. So spiritually speaking, my higher power, or God, or divine intelligence, however you would like to phrase this, intervened and gave me a break and got me the hell out of there and set me on 37 years worth of computer training and tech support that I've done forever. I do remember walking into an agent's office with my first compact portable computer. They weren't even laptops then, they were like a piece of luggage. And I showed the agent how with holding 2 keys down, you could bring up your contacts, your calendars, your dialer, your spreadsheet. And I saw more interest out of this agent for that in his daily life than had I brought him one more new artist tape like hundreds of other people were bringing him every week. And I also remember saying, if I have to do one more overdub session, meaning hand claps, drumsticks, faking a live audience, deciding to add 8 additional harmony parts, one voice at a time, I think I probably would have strangled myself. I was so tired of being in the studio and having to do overdubs. I also, as you know, didn't tolerate people who were late or drugged or whatever coming in, so I ran an interesting ship there at the same time. But looking back, the thrill of being in the studio and doing lots of overdubs and lots of fine-tuning was gone as of the late 60s for me. 70s on, I had no patience for it whatsoever, and I certainly didn't have the artistic intent that the great producers had that would stay there and just make everything perfect. Mine was slam, bam, in, out, next. And you know that, I've told you that before. So in the final synopsis, the universe that I lived in was a dinosaur universe. A new style of music was coming in, and based on the culture that I lived in, which was a corporate staff producer, the way I was trained, I was ill fit to be an independent and to be out there competing with the Bill Schnees of the world. I was not hip, I didn't hang out, I didn't solicit, and based on my reputation as being kind of a slick pop white boy who makes mocha mix music, what kind of referrals did I get? Well, I was supposed to audition and see whether I could work with Debbie Boone, You Light Up My Life. Mary McGregor, Torn Between Two Lovers. Did I get any within the industry referrals that were as hip as the ones that Bill Schnee was getting? No, I didn't circulate in those circles. That wasn't my universe. My universe was that if any time work came up, I would get a call from a white boss, never a black boss, even though I specialized in black artists. I'd get a call from a white boss to do something sweet, which is what I was known for, and yes, what I was probably best at. But I never knew that Bill Schnee's world even existed, let alone met this genius of a man who worked right down the street from me for so many years. Never met him. Wish I had. Maybe I can before I leave the planet. It would be a real honor to meet him. I'm going to read you something really quickly. It's just a quick bio on Bill so that you can appreciate the magnitude of this man and his accomplishments. He was born an American musician, producer, and audio engineer. Has been nominated 11 times for the Best Engineered Album. 11 times. Non-classical Grammy Award, and worked on a multitude of other Grammy-nominated and awarded albums. He has won 2 Grammys, an Emmy for Outstanding Sound for a Television Special, and a Dove Award in a 45-plus year career. 45 plus. A very diverse artist, underlined, very diverse artist. Schnee has received, wait for it, over 135 gold and platinum records, and has recorded and mixed over 50 top 20 singles. Wow. Wow. Kudos, Bill. Kudos, Tom Dowd. Kudos, David Foster. Kudos, Tom Bell. You guys, you're the best of the best. I was a fly speck of a producer in comparison to you guys. Now, I can name 10 or 15 other producers who were just sensational producers, and I'll just give you one. Lenny Waronker just belongs in the same batch as these guys. But if you look at the depth of those 3 producers I just mentioned, not Lenny, the other 3, and other than, say, Tom Bell and Lenny Waronker, who had their own kind of genre that they specialized in. Tom Bell, David Foster, and Bill Schnee worked in all genres and kicked ass. Blows my mind. Makes me not feel envious. I'm not envious, I'm in awe. And I realize how insignificant my career was. But I had fun doing that when I did it. Okay, and looking back, the proudest moments in my life are not musical. The proudest moment in my life is keeping my brother alive for 2 years, where he was supposed to already have died, and preventing 3 friends' suicide attempts. Those are the proudest moments in my life. And the hundreds of people that I have supported at the technology level to help them with their lives, those are really the great accomplishments of my life. I really believe that God said, John, you can go have some creative fun for a few years. Just enjoy the hell out of that. But when it's over, don't regret it. Don't look back. Now move forward and be of service to others, which in turn will be of much greater service to yourself. So I've learned to be a better human being. I learned as of my last romantic relationship how to be a better partner. And I've learned more life lessons outside of music. Overall, after my record career was over, I was given the opportunity, a fabulous opportunity, to work hard, to learn how to be a better person, which I hope I am today. Okay, this was a long one, but that's everything that got triggered by reading Bill Schnee's wonderful book, Chairman of the Board. Check it out. Take care. As always, thanks for watching, and bye-bye.